24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News. Medical professors at all of South Korea's so-called Big Five hospitals have decided to take a weekly day off from work. Despite this, the government stands firm on medical reform, urging those senior doctors not to walk out on their patients. President Yoon and main opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung are scheduled to have their first ever official sit-down meeting on Monday without a preset list of topics. The meeting, which was originally planned to take place this week, comes after days of disputes between the two sides over the agenda. The Israeli military says preparations for its ground offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah are complete. With continued artillery shelling in the eastern part of the city, residents are evacuating. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin with growing patient concerns over a service vacuum at hospitals. Medical professors at the country's major hospitals have decided to take a day off once a week, except for certain cases, amid their prolonged conflict with the government. Our An Sung-jin starts us off.
With the government and medical community still divided over the medical school admission quota issue, the professors at all of South Korea's so-called Big Five hospitals have now decided to halt most medical services for 1 weekday. 4 out of 5 had already decided to do so. But on Friday, the Catholic University of Korea, Seoul St. Mary's Hospital followed suit, announcing that every Friday from May 3rd will be a day off. Starting from April 30th, professors at Severance Hospital will take a day off every week till the end of May, while those at Seoul National University Hospital will decide at the upcoming emergency committee meeting whether they will take 1 day off per week after 30th. Professors at Samsung Medical Center will take voluntary days off based on their working schedule, and those at Asa Medical Center will take a break on May 3rd. Whether this will become a regular thing during the week is to be discussed by the hospital. Surgeries and outpatient treatment will be paused for the day, but emergency and critical care, as well as treatment of people already in hospital, will continue. The medical community says this decision has been made due to prolonged working hours, exhaustion, and mental and physical stress. Even if the Korean Medical Association's emergency committee decides on a date for a weekly day off, it is the individual professor's choice on whether to take it or not. The health ministry maintains its staunch position in the medical reform and ensure to reduce any inconvenience.
The government will continue to monitor the situation at emergency medical centers to ensure that patients get to a hospital on time. We urge medical school professors not to ignore their patients and to continue to stand by them.
It has been about a month since doctors submitted their resignations, and centering around the leading professors, it is becoming clear that more will be leaving their positions. The chairman of the Emergency Council at the Medical School of Ulsan University announced on Friday that he will be leaving effective immediately. Medical professors from Seoul National University Hospital are looking to resign as of May 1st and are considering absenteeism without notice if their resignation letters are not accepted. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
President Yoon and main opposition party leader Lee Jae-myung will sit down on Monday to hold their first ever official meeting, as both emphasize the need to discuss pressing issues related to people's livelihoods. Yoon Senior Secretary for Political Affairs Hong Cheol-ho said Friday that the meeting will take place at the presidential office on Monday at 2 p.m. Hong said the two are expected to talk over tea for about an hour, although the meeting could stretch on. The president wishes to hear all that the opposition leader has to say as soon as possible without a preset list of topics. This follows days of contention between the two sides, as the presidential office said there should not be a preset list of topics, while the opposition party insisted that there should be, which should include a universal payout of 250,000 won. both expressed hope that Monday's talks would serve as an opportunity to resolve urgent matters related to people's livelihoods and the economy. President Yoon Suk-yeol has picked attorney Oh Dong-woon to lead the country's corruption investigation office for high-ranking officials. Yoon's office announced Friday that the attorney has been named as the chief of the investigation body, citing his experience as a judge at Seoul Central District Court, Ulsan District Court, as well as the Seongnam Branch Court of Suwon District Court. Since 1998, Oh worked as a judge for nearly 20 years and appears to be a neutral candidate who has largely kept out of public controversies and away from political affiliations. However, before taking office, Oh's appointment will have to be approved by the National Assembly. On the diplomatic front, the ambassador-designates of 9 nations presented their credentials to President Yoon Suk-yeol in a ceremony on Friday. This includes Jacques Flies from Luxembourg and Georgy Zinoviev from the Russian Federation, and a career diplomat who has a background in China and Asia affairs. Jeffrey David Robinson from Australia also presented his credentials, along with Marek Repovsky from the Slovak Republic and Vu Ho from Vietnam. Earlier in the U.S., delegates from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo held an inaugural meeting aimed at addressing the abuse of sensitive technologies through tighter export controls, as agreed during last year's trilateral summit at Camp David. The U.S. is particularly concerned about China, Russia, and Iran. Our Lee Soo-jin has details.
High-level officials from South Korea, the United States, and Japan have agreed to strengthen cooperation in tightening export controls and blocking leaks of sensitive technology. The agreement was reached between the 3 countries during the Disruptive Technology Protection Network Summit held on Thursday local time in Washington, according to South Korea's Trade Ministry and Justice Ministry. The Justice Ministry and its counterparts in Tokyo and Washington will work together to enforce laws regarding technology leakages, while the Trade Ministry agreed to strengthen export controls. The governments of each country are planning to also more actively share information in areas of technology protection and export controls. The meeting comes after the leaders of the 3 nations met at Camp David last August, where they agreed to launch the Disruptive Technology Protection Network in order to work more closely to prevent innovative technologies from being used to endanger national security. And Thursday's meeting marked the first high-level trilateral summit of the Disruptive Technology Protection Network. While the Camp David summit did not mention who was abusing these innovative technologies, U.S. Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco called out China, Russia, and Iran in her opening remarks during Thursday's meeting, where she said, "From China backing cyber hackers who target international businesses and political leaders, to Russia unleashing the most significant land invasion in Europe since the Second World War, to Iran plotting to assassinate dissidents around the world." She added that their actions are far-reaching, as these threats are playing out on phones and online apps. Earlier this week, in a move to address what the U.S. government sees as a national security threat, President Biden signed a bipartisan legislation to ban Chinese-owned TikTok unless it is sold. The U.S. senior official also said that artificial intelligence is currently at the top of the U.S. government's enforcement priority list for disruptive technologies. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The U.S. and China are to hold their first high-level talks on artificial intelligence within the upcoming weeks. During his visit to China, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stated during a press conference that the 2 countries will be discussing rising concerns on AI within the coming weeks. But there was no further mention of TikTok after U.S. President Joe Biden this week signed a bill to ban the Chinese social media platform. Blinken's meeting with China's top diplomat Wang Yi came amid efforts to stabilize relations and expand communication between the 2 countries. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to visit China next month for what would be his first foreign trip since he extended his presidential term for another 6 years. Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has warned China to stop aiding Russia's war against Ukraine if it seeks good relations with Western countries. Bae Eun-ji explains.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced plans to visit China in May. He made the announcement at a meeting of the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs in Moscow on Thursday local time, but did not give any other details, including when exactly the trip would take place. This would be his first overseas trip since the 71-year-old secured his fifth term in office through last month's election, but his second trip to China in 7 months, since October 2023. As Russia faces further isolation from the West after its invasion of Ukraine, Putin is also soon set to visit North Korea. Earlier this year, North Korea's state media reported that Putin thanked Kim Jong-un for his invitation to visit Pyongyang and pledged to go there at an early date. In the meantime, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, using unusually harsh words, warned China to stop supporting Russia's war against Ukraine if it wants to have good relations with the West. While visiting Berlin, he explained that Russia imported 90% of its microelectronics from China, which are used to manufacture missiles, tanks, and aircraft, and that Beijing is also working to provide Moscow with improved satellite capabilities and imaging.
China says it wants good relations with the West. At the same time, Beijing continues to fuel the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. They cannot have it both ways.
The NATO chief added that it's not too late for Ukraine to prevail as more support from the West is on the way, noting that the U.S. approved more than $60 billion in new military aid, and the U.K. promised support earlier this week. He also highlighted that Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea must not believe that they can get their way by using force, saying they must understand that democracies are strong. Arirang News.
South Korea's better-than-expected economic growth of 1.3% on quarter in the first 3 months of this year could make the opposition party's call for a supplementary budget lose ground. Our Park Gun-woo explains.
South Korea's opposition Democratic Party's proposal for a supplementary budget of 13 trillion won, or around $9.4 billion to stabilize people's livelihoods, could lose ground as the economy has recently seen higher than expected growth. The Bank of Korea's data for the gross domestic product in the first quarter released on Thursday showed an on-quarter surprise rise of 1.3% due to a recovery in exports, construction investment, and private consumption. The growth figure was higher than the early expectations of 0.6 to 0.7% for economic growth in the first quarter. According to Article 89 of the National Finance Act, the government can only make extra budgets in exceptional cases, such as a war, major natural disasters, or an economic recession. But as the opposition party is asserting economic crisis as the reason for a supplementary budget, the strong economic data for Q1 could possibly put the brakes on their recent proposal, as it does not meet those legal requirements. Still, as those findings are shown to be partially due to the base effect, and as both the ruling People Power Party and opposition Democratic Party are concerned about the economic sentiment, it has been reported that the opposition party could still push for the extra budget. But other factors could prevent the proposal from moving forward. These include the impact of the record-high shortfall in tax revenue from last year and the backlash toward frequent supplementary budgets, especially as the government debt exceeded 50% of GDP last year. The government has made extra budgets 4 times in 2020 and 2 times each in 2021 and 2022 during the COVID-19 pandemic. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Falling short of market expectations, the U.S. economic growth slowed to 1.6% annualized pace in the first quarter of the year, raising fears of stagflation. Shinsebyuk reports.
The U.S. Department of Commerce released a report on Thursday that showed that the world's biggest economy grew at an annualized rate of 1.6% for the first quarter of this year. This marks the lowest rate since a contraction of 0.6% in quarter 2 of 2022. This figure is significantly lower than the previous quarter's growth of 3.4%. It also falls well below the 2.4% increase anticipated by market experts polled by the Wall Street Journal. The Commerce Department attributed the slowdown to reduced personal spending, fewer exports, and decreased government expenditure at both the local and federal levels. Personal consumption, the largest driver of the U.S. economy, increased by only 2.5% in the January to March period, down 3.3% on the quarter. There was an uptick in spending on services such as healthcare, finance, and insurance, but there was a notable decline in the consumption of goods, including cars, gasoline, and other energy products. Challenges remain in the U.S. as inflation remains persistently high amid weakening economic growth. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, a key inflation variable for the Federal Reserve, rose at a 3.4% annualized pace for the quarter. It is the highest increase in the past year and a substantial jump from the 1.8% seen in the prior quarter. The core PCE prices, which exclude food and energy, jumped 3.7%. This figure, a key indicator for the U.S. Central Bank when setting interest rates, far exceeds the Fed's target of 2%, dampening hopes that the Federal Reserve would begin cutting interest rates in the near term. Amid fears of stagflation, a scenario of stagnant economic growth fared with high inflation. Wall Street stocks closed lower on Thursday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slid by 0.98%. The S&P 500 lost 0.46%. Meanwhile, the Nasdaq Composite fell 0.64%. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Israel's ground operation in Rafah in its fight against Hamas looks imminent, with more Israeli tanks deployed near the border. A plan to evacuate civilians is underway. Our Kim Bo-kyung gives us details.
Israel's military operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah seems to be imminent. There is growing evidence of an Israeli operation into this corner of the Strip, where more than half of the Palestinian territory's population of 2.3 million has sought shelter, with around 30 tanks and troops deployed to a nearby military base. This comes as the Israeli military has begun moving one of its main infantry brigades south. According to the Times of Israel, citing military sources, two reservist brigades, the 679th Armored Brigade and the 2nd Infantry Brigade, which have been operating on the northern border, will be moved to the central region of Gaza, freeing up the Nahal Brigade to join with the 162nd Division in preparing for future operations, including the planned offensive into Rafah. This comes in line with what Israel has kept on saying, that it will move into the city to launch a full-scale ground assault. Chief of the General Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, Herzi Halevi, informed Israel's wartime cabinet on Thursday that the army had completed preparations for a ground attack on Rafah and that they were ready to move in once the order was given. With the Israel Defense Forces operation in Rafah looming, Israel has begun preparations to evacuate civilians and is coordinating with neighboring Egypt. According to Axios, Israel's top intelligence and military officials met with Egyptian officials in Cairo on Wednesday, which is currently concerned that the Israeli operation would lead to tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians entering its territory. Egypt and the United Arab Emirates have already set up large tent shelters between Rafah and Khan Yunis, as well as in the coastal Wasi area northwest of Rafah. Meanwhile, a top UN aid official on Wednesday urged Israel to allow a sustained flow of assistance into the Gaza Strip, saying urgent and continuous humanitarian measures should be in place.
Whilst implementation of some measures is ongoing, further definitive and urgent steps are needed to set the course for a sustained flow of humanitarian and commercial goods into Gaza in terms of volume, need, and reach.
The U.S. urging comes after Israel pledged nearly 3 weeks ago to improve aid access, after U.S. President Joe Biden demanded steps to alleviate the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Thank you very much for your briefing.
On the cultural front, while all BTS members are completing their mandatory military service, they stay connected with fans through their music. Group leader RM has his second solo album scheduled for release next month. BTS's agency Big Hit Music announced on Friday that RM's new album, Right Place, Wrong Person, will be released on May 24th at 1 p.m. The album consists of 11 tracks, all of which RM contributed to by writing the lyrics and, according to the agency, infused them with alternative music and rich sounds. The upcoming release comes almost 1.5 years after his first solo album, Indigo, was dropped in December 2022. In other news, spring is classical music season here in Korea. The second oldest out of Korea's 3 major classical music festivals, the Tongyeong International Music Festival, took place last month. This week, the oldest, the Symphony Festival with Hanwha, is running until Sunday, and the youngest, the Seoul Spring Festival of Chamber Music, just kicked off a few days ago. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin tells us what you can expect at this year's edition.
The youngest of Korea's big 3 classical music festivals is back. The Seoul Spring Festival of Chamber Music has returned for its 19th edition. The orchestrator is first-generation classical musician and violinist Kang Dong-seok. Back in 2006, Kang teamed up with the Seoul city government to turn his dream into reality.
That was one of my dreams, that to start something in Korea, and this kind of festival exists everywhere in the world, and in any major cities they would have this kind of, very specific festival devoted to chamber music. So,
but SSF isn't just about performances. It's about breaking down barriers, especially in chamber music, and making classical tunes accessible to everyone.
I think it's just they have some kind of cliche that chamber music is difficult and not accessible and all that, but I think that's completely wrong, so we have to try to prove that.
Joining Kang this year are 59 musicians in perfect harmony under the theme All in the Family. The lineup includes performances from families of musicians to ensembles who forged tight bonds through years of collaboration. Among the performers is Matthew Dufour, former principal flutist at the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra.
It's quite intense, but it's always such a great opportunity to see old colleagues, and to meet also new ones. And I have to say, in Korea, there are so many fantastic young musicians, and so that's why it's exciting. It's kind of
SSF's impact goes beyond the stage. Throughout the festival's nearly 2-decade run, Korea has seen a rise in chamber music festivals across the country.
Festivals like SSF are really making classical music more accessible by offering the public a series of top-notch performances. Also, with more festivals popping up and increased funding from both the public and private sectors, they're able to attract better artists and put on more captivating shows in proper venues.
For those who wish to explore the world of classical music, the Seoul Spring Festival of Chamber Music runs until May 5th. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Temperatures will rise even further. Early summer-like heat is expected during the weekend. Most parts of the country will rise to nearly 30 degrees Celsius tomorrow, with daytime temperatures rising to 27 degrees in Seoul and 30 on Sunday. It will be this hot during the day, but coolness will be felt in the morning and evening. Meanwhile, some of the recent yellow dust affected the eastern parts of the country again today. The air will be dusty throughout the western regions tomorrow morning as the atmosphere is stagnant. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Gwangju will start off at 13 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 28 in Daejeon and Gwangju, Daegu and Gyeongju 30 degrees Celsius. It is expected to rain across the country on Monday to ease the high temperature phenomenon. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that brings an end to this newscast tonight. Thank you for watching. Hope everyone has a great weekend and a good night.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, look my way. Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.